Hey, everybody. How are you doing this Saturday afternoon? It is Saturday afternoon, and here in Alexandria, it's about 400 degrees outside. Slight exaggeration there, but it is definitely warm out there. Let's just check and see here audio-wise. Just want to make sure coming in loud and clear. For audio, if you can hear me, go ahead and leave a comment letting me know that you can hear me. And you see me looking down, I'm checking your comments are slightly delayed. When we stream from our computer over to Facebook, we've got a slight delay thanks to Zoom. So if you can hear me, go ahead and leave a comment there. I'm going to be checking comments, answering questions throughout our time together. Let's just see here. Anybody doing anything exciting today? I am drinking a, don't tell Amanda at Tamp and Grind. I'm drinking a combat coffee from over at As the Crow Flies in Pineville. If Amanda had these, I would get these from Amanda, but they don't do the combat coffee. It's got, I'm trying to think of what all they put in it. Coconut butter, coconut oil, coconut something. I don't know. It's supposed to be really good for you. Really enjoy them. So Amanda, if you do watch this, y'all need to start selling these over at Tamp and Grind. It'd make it a little easier so I don't have to go to Pineville to get these drinks. So what I want to do, hey, Richard, thanks so much for joining us. What I want to do today is I want to walk through some frameworks that you can use to grow, to scale your company. And I'm going to explain what a framework is, what's the difference between a strategy, a tactic, a framework, why you need to have frameworks in your business. And then I'm going to go through each of those frameworks, the 7 frameworks, and I'm going to walk through the exact steps or some things that you should be doing within each of those frameworks, or again, how you can create those frameworks for yourself, for your business. I'm going to look down occasionally again to look at comments, answer questions that people may have. So if you have a question, a comment, something doesn't make sense, leave a comment. I will circle back. I will answer your question. And again, thanks so much for taking time on this Saturday to join us. So let me go ahead now and share my screen here. And perfect. Okay, so we're going to be diving through this and working through this today. We're going to spend probably about 30 minutes or so walking through these frameworks. I'm going to leave some very specific time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. But again, I'll be looking down occasionally for comments, for questions. If anything's unclear, just let me know and I will do my best to explain it. So let's go ahead and dive in. What is a framework? We're going to talk about that. But first, for those who don't know, Wayne Mullins here at Ugly Mug Marketing, and I'm the father of 4. So we've got 4 kids. My oldest is 13. My youngest is 7, 3 boys and a little girl. The girl's the baby. She runs the show, although we don't want to admit that. She runs the show. I love learning. I love books. I love experimenting with new things. I love trying new things. And in some odd ways, I enjoy failing. That's an acquired thing, I guess, to learn to love failure. But if you're not failing in certain things, then you're not trying, right? You're not experimenting. You're not getting outside your comfort zone. So I love learning new things. And they say that learning actually happens when you apply whatever it is that you learn, you read, you heard, et cetera. So learning actually takes place in the application. I put down, I hate running. I actually run 6 days a week. And to be honest with you, I don't really enjoy it. I hate it every single morning when I put on my shoes, when I walk out the door. I don't look forward to it. But every single day when I'm done, I'm so glad that I did it. So glad that I took the time, that I suffered through it, especially in these hot Louisiana summer hot mornings. it's very, very warm out in the morning, very humid, very muggy. For those familiar with the Enneagram, I'm the Enneagram 3, which is the achiever. How many of you, just curious, are familiar with the Enneagram? How many of you, anybody out there watching, familiar with the Enneagram? If you are, then you know what the 3 is. The 3 is the achiever. If you're not, Enneagram's kind of a personality test, a personality profile. It's actually, supposedly, it's one of the oldest in existence. It goes way, way back in time and history. And it's used to help people kind of understand their makeup, understand how they make decisions, how they act, et cetera. So that's the Enneagram test. You should look it up if you're not familiar with it. So here's what we're going to cover today. Why 7 figures? So let's start with that. We're going to talk about why reaching 7 figures. And when I say 7 figures, that's $1 million a year in revenue. Why 7 figures should be a goal if you're not at that level yet. Next, we'll talk about what's a framework. Then we're going to go through the 7 frameworks that you're going to need in place to reach 7 figures. And then we'll do a Q&A and then any next steps that may be there. So thanks again, everybody, for watching, for checking in. Angela, thanks so much for joining us. Philip, thanks for joining us as well. Again, I'm going to be checking comments throughout. So if you got a question, leave it in the comments. So why 7 figures? Why should you or I as business owners pursue or have a goal of reaching 7 figures or $1 million a year in revenue? Well, first of all, the first reason I would say is about you. And this actually comes from Jim Rohn. Some of you may be familiar with Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn is one of the original, so to speak, motivational speakers in the country, in the world. If you're not familiar with Jim Rohn, I highly recommend do like a YouTube search, watch some of his old videos, and it's phenomenal storyteller and ability to just connect and communicate with an audience. And he talks about everyone should set a goal to be a millionaire, not because of the $1 million, but because what you personally have to become in the process of becoming that millionaire. So same thing's true in business. When you set a goal and when you reach 7 figures in business, it's not about reaching that platform or that milestone. It's really about who you have to become as a leader to get your company to that level. So that's number one. The first reason is you should set that goal because it's about you. It's about reaching your full potential as a leader and growing as a leader. The next reason is because it gives you options, right? So the more revenue that you have coming in, assuming you're profitable and generating profit off of that revenue, it gives you the ability to seek out new opportunities. It gives you the ability to invest in things when others aren't able to invest in things. And so it opens up the door to all kinds of possibilities. And it's so true in life as well. They say that the more successful you become, whether in business or in life, the more options you have available to you. And so those are the 2 reasons I would say why you should have a goal of 7 figures as a goal for your business. Now, what is a framework? What do we mean when we say framework? What is the difference in a framework and a strategy or a tactic? Well, simply this: a framework is the basic underlying structure or system or concept. So it's it's the structure that goes underneath a system or a concept. So the word meta, some of you may be familiar with the word meta. It's kind of like the meta level. So this is deeper than a strategy. It's deeper than a tactic. It is the underlying system or structure that you put in place. And so when you think of frameworks, you want to kind of separate. This is not a strategy. This is not something that you're going to pursue over the next year, over the next 2 years, whatever that time frame may be. A framework really is something that is underneath. In one aspect, you could almost think of it as a core value. It's a little different than the core value, but it's similar in concept. In other words, it sets the direction. It sets the system, the underlying system for the direction you're going to go with your company. So let's kind of dive in now to the 7 frameworks. All right. So the very first one we're going to talk about, and this is a warning. So all of you out there watching, this is just a warning for you. This first one, the mirror framework, is going to be harsh. All right. So we're going to start with the most difficult one first. And fortunately, I have the advantage of blaming the harshness of this on someone else. So it's not me being harsh. It's someone else, someone who's written a very popular book on business, and it's Michael Gerber. Michael Gerber says this: your business is nothing more than a distinct reflection of who you are. And so he's speaking to business owners here. He's speaking to entrepreneurs. If your thinking is sloppy, your business will be sloppy. If you are disorganized, your business will be disorganized. If your business is to change, as it must, if you're going to continue to thrive, you must change first. So that's speaking to us as leaders, as entrepreneurs. That is directed to us, that our businesses, as much as we don't want to admit this, are truly reflections of us as leaders. The people we lead, their performance is a reflection of the way we lead ourselves. And so I would encourage you to adopt this framework. So when you look at your business and things aren't going well, that you would look in the mirror first and you would analyze and explore, why is it, or what is it about the way I'm leading, about the way I'm managing, that is causing this or reflecting this into my business. So the mirror framework is a very important one, and it's at the core, at the base of all the other frameworks that we're going to walk through today. So here's some things. Don't settle for easy questions, all right? Ask yourself the difficult questions. Don't let yourself off the hook. Ask the questions that make you uncomfortable, right? For some of you hearing this and listening to this, you're thinking, this, when I read Michael Gerber's quote, it was very offensive to you. And there was all these reasons that came up within why that's not true, and how, example after example, maybe you're in your mind, you're thinking through, well, I know this person and this person who have seemingly successful businesses, but their lives are sloppy, or their lives are messy, or whatever it may be. And that may be true for them. But what I would tell you is, you don't see everything in their business. So just because from the outside it doesn't look sloppy or messy or whatever it may be, you can't see everything. So for yourself, don't settle for the easy questions. Seek the difficult questions. Seek the truth in all areas. It's funny how, as entrepreneurs, business owners, we often, we say we want the truth, and yet we get so defensive when someone critiques our product or our service, right? Because our product, our service, or our business, it's our baby, right? It's the thing that we work so hard to grow, to protect, to build, to maintain. We're pouring our lives into our businesses. And so when someone critiques it or says something that's not necessarily complimentary of our business or of our product or service, we get defensive. And instead, we need to seek the truth in those areas. We need to look for the things about what they're saying that may be true, because oftentimes there's some truth in those things that sting. There's another saying that I really love, and the saying is this: when furious, get curious. So when furious, get curious. And what that simply means is this: when you feel that sting of the truth and it makes you mad, you get furious, you need to get curious. What about what was said or what was done, what about that is making you upset, making you furious? Get curious when you get furious. Next, it should feel uncomfortable. Leading a business, growing a business, understanding that you and you alone, the person looking in the mirror, are responsible for the business, and the business is simply reflecting back you. It should make you feel uncomfortable. But at the other side of that, the flip side of that, it should be encouraging. It should challenge you, and it should challenge you to be intentional in your personal development and your development as a leader, as an entrepreneur of your company. Next, framework number 2 is implicit versus explicit framework. So the next couple of frameworks that we're going to talk through center around communication. And as you know, with everything in life, whether it's business, whether it's personal, whether it's relationships, whether it's family, friends, whatever it may be, communication is crucial. Communication is where oftentimes we run into problems with relationships and where things kind of go downhill, right? So we're going to talk, a couple of frameworks are going to be specifically around communication. So this next framework is what we would call implicit versus explicit framework. And inside your organization, all the communication falls into 2 categories. It's either implicit or it's explicit, okay? Implicit or explicit. So what's the difference in the 2? Explicit means it's clearly stated and in detail, leaving absolutely no room for confusion or doubt. So let me ask you a question. When you communicate, how often would you say that you communicate with explicit communication? In other words, there's no room for confusion. There's no room for doubt. There's no room for misunderstanding. If we're honest with ourselves, we don't communicate that way very often. We get sloppy in our communication. And the reason that we often get sloppy in our communication is because we assume that they know exactly what we're talking about. So as a leader, as a manager, you may sit down and explain something like to somebody on your team. You may say, here's all the things I want you to do. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. Here's the steps you need to take. And we make assumptions as we're communicating that we're assuming they understand certain things. But oftentimes we aren't as clear. We don't remove all the doubt, all the possibilities for confusion in those conversations. The other form of communication, the other part of this framework, is implicit. It's implied, though not plainly expressed. And this is where we get in trouble. Here's why. As a leader, as an entrepreneur, we often communicate using implicit communication, and we give our word implicitly. And so let me give you a very specific example of this for Ugly Mug Marketing. So one of my goals for this week that was gone over and is kind of on our agenda, on our schedule, in our team meeting, this was my week to do a webinar, which is what we're kind of doing now. And although no one directly said, hey, Wayne, it's your week to do the webinar. When are you doing the webinar? What's the webinar on? It was implied because I was next on the agenda, right? I was next in that schedule. So it was implied that I was the one who was going to do the webinar this week. And it clearly was my turn this week, but no one explicitly said, Wayne, this is your week. What day are you going to do it, etc. So it was implied. So where we get in trouble is the team implicitly understood, communicated that it's Wayne's turn to do the webinar this week. Had I not done the webinar this week, I would have created suspicion around the ability to keep my word. And we're going to talk about that in just a second in another framework. So for this framework, the thing that's important is, am I communicating explicitly or implicitly? And there's a lot of implicit communication isn't necessarily wrong, and it's not necessarily bad, but we just have to understand, are we making assumptions because it's implicit, right? So when we hire someone, maybe the initial, part of their hiring agreement is they are going to work from 8 to 5. Well, over time, maybe that person starts coming in late, right? They show up at 8:05, then a little bit later, it's 8:10. We as entrepreneurs, we may get frustrated and think, how do they not know, right? When we hired them, their schedule was 8 to 5. Why are they coming in now at 8:10? Part of that is because it's implicit over time that that's going to remain true. Instead of explicitly stating, hey, when we brought you on, you signed up for an 8 to 5. You've been coming in a little bit late. So is there something that you're unclear on, something that's not right? Like, how do we resolve this? So that's the distinction between implicit and explicit communication. And so many of your frustrations as a leader, as an entrepreneur, will dissipate when you wrap your head around this framework and when you clearly ask yourself, how am I communicating? Is this implicit? Is it explicit? Am I sure that they fully understand? And so only until you embrace explicit communication, where you're making sure there's no room for confusion, it's only in that time that you can then evaluate and make decisions based on what's taking place or not taking place in your business. If it's not explicitly clear, you cannot take sound action because you're making assumptions that something is implied to them. Clear communication isn't about what is said, it's about what is understood. What does that mean? That means this: you as the communicator, as the person speaking to someone else, it doesn't matter what you're saying. All that matters is what is being understood on the other end. So as a communicator, if you shift your thinking around this idea and you understand and you embrace ownership of the fact that this is so much about what is understood, not what is said. What you'll discover is you can rearrange and recraft your messaging so that everything is centered around on what's understood and not just on what is being said or what you're gonna say, right? So here's some things to consider. How was it communicated? Was it implicit? Was it explicit? What was actually understood? What was understood from their end? You know what you said or what you believed you said and communicated, but what was actually understood? And then look at this. What are you frustrated over? Chances are when you look at your business, your organization, the thing that you're frustrated over and around has to do with communication. And most often can be cleared up by using explicit communication to clear up the matter. And what you'll discover in that process is your implicit, what you thought was implied, wasn't clearly implied. And so explicit communication will clear that up for you. Lack of clear communication is likely the culprit for that frustration. That's what we just talked about. The third framework is this: trust versus suspicion. And again, this is, this is about communication as well. This is about ensuring that everyone on your team is communicating correctly and the same way. So every time you or I give our word, whether explicit or implicit, we are either building trust or suspicion, okay? Trust is the foundation of a good culture. It's the foundation of a good relationship. Trust is at the core of so much in business, right? If we don't have trust, we don't have much left. So when you give your word, you're either building trust or you're building suspicion. And here's the interesting thing. We judge others on their actions, but we judge ourselves based on our intentions. So let me break this down for you. So earlier I gave the example of, in the team meeting, my name was on the agenda for, it's my week to do the webinar. I gave my word by the fact that I didn't speak up and say, no, I couldn't do a webinar. Had I not done a webinar this week, my actions would have built suspicion amongst the team. How so? Because my word was on the agenda that this was my week, Wayne's week, to do the webinar. By not doing the webinar, I have not kept my word. So they would have judged me based on my actions. They don't necessarily understand, the team doesn't understand or know my intentions. So my intentions were good, right? My intentions were to do this webinar. Actually, my intentions were to do this webinar on Thursday. Schedule-wise, it just simply did not work out. So I'm doing it today on a Saturday. But you see, when you give your word as the leader, we judge ourselves based on our intentions. And here's the funny thing, everyone else is doing the same thing. Everyone else is judging their actions based on their intentions, not on the actual things that they are doing. So it's very important to have this conversation, but it's probably more important to have this conversation with yourself as the leader. And what I mean by that is go back to the framework number one, which is the mirror framework, and be real with yourself, be blunt with yourself. Are you building trust through your actions? Are you living up to your word? Whether your word was implicit or explicit, are you living up to your word? And this framework is at the core of communication, and it's at the core of building a great culture. When you think of great cultures and you think of winning teams, trust is the element that's there, not suspicion, okay? And so having this conversation with first yourself as the leader, second with your team, is vital to building a culture. It's vital to building a team that can enable you to scale to the 7-figure mark. So ask yourself every single time, what am I building? Am I building trust or am I building suspicion? And you have to continually have this conversation. This can't be a one-time conversation. This needs to be a continual conversation. It needs to come up regularly in your team meetings. It needs to come up regularly when you evaluate yourself. So what I mean by that is I would encourage you as a leader to spend time, maybe once a month, maybe however often you're able to do it, but evaluate yourself. Ask yourself, where are ways that I am building suspicion amongst my team and not building trust? What are the areas that I'm either giving my word implicitly or explicitly and I'm not living up to that, right? So trust versus suspicion is a huge one. I can't stress this one enough. It's extremely important, which is why it's here in one of the 7 frameworks. The 4th framework is this: results, not reasons. This actually happens to be a core value of ours, but it ties so much into these last couple of frameworks that we're talking about. But it's different because of this. This is the way we define this, or we talk about results, not reasons. There's always a reason. And so you can interchange or change out here the word reason with an excuse, right? There's always a reason. And often they're valid reasons. But results are results. Results are reality. And so before I finish this, thinking back to me in this webinar, right? I had a lot of valid reasons why I should have done this webinar, or why I planned to do this webinar earlier in the week, and it didn't happen. I had a lot of good reasons or good excuses that it just simply didn't happen. But the results are the results. Either I do a webinar or I don't do a webinar. And so the results are the reality. Results alone are the best measure of your confidence, your competence, and your courage. Results and reasons are mutually exclusive, and simply means the more of one you have, the less of the other you will have. So the more results you have, the less excuses or reasons you will have in your organization. And flip it the other way. The more excuses you have, the less success you have, the less results you have. Again, this is a framework that needs to be embedded and ingrained into all of your communication, into all of your goals that you have in your organization. Results versus reasons, results, not reasons. Are you making excuses? Where are you as a leader? Where am I as a leader? Where are we letting ourselves off the hook? Where are we not, where are we accepting excuses from ourselves? So results, not reasons. Remember, it starts with you. We just talked about that. The results, though, this goes back to implicit versus explicit, they must be clearly defined. What are the specific measurable results that you are after? What are the specific measurable results that you are after? And then when reasons are given, so when someone gives a reason or an excuse, it must be acknowledged. And when I say acknowledged, it must be acknowledged for what it actually is, which is an excuse. Right? It's an excuse. It's a reason. And that doesn't mean you belittle someone. That doesn't mean you make fun of them. That doesn't mean you put them down. It simply is acknowledging the fact or the statement that you committed to a certain result. And now you're giving me a reason. And that results and reasons are 2 completely different things. And so when you begin having this conversation and you have it on a regular basis, it becomes ingrained in the culture. It becomes ingrained in every decision that gets made in your organization. And then the last one, once you're clear about this and it begins being a part of the dialogue and everything that's taking place in your business, you want to use a scoreboard. Before we go into the next one, what is one of your favorite sports? Like, what is one of your favorite sports to maybe either watch on TV or, something you enjoy playing, or maybe you used to enjoy playing, something maybe your kids play? What is one of your favorite sports? Think about that for just a second. And then why is it? Why is that particular sport one of your favorite sports? What makes that sport your favorite? All right. With that thought in mind, with your favorite sport in mind, let's move into the next one. Framework number 5 is scoreboard. All right, so scoreboards. When you think of sports, what do all sports have in common? All sports have a scoreboard. Whether or not it's a visible scoreboard, right? So, some places don't have visible scoreboards, but they all have some form of scorekeeping or scoreboard. Someone's keeping score somewhere in all sports. So you think across the board of all the different sports, there's some form of scoreboard, some form of measurement that's public, that people can see, that fans can see often, right? It's on the big television screen, or it's the big actual real scoreboard, whatever it may be. All sports have a scoreboard in common. And let's think about that for just a second. When you have a scoreboard, it does two things. One, the players on the field or the players on the court or the players, whatever the sport is, they can see the scoreboard. They can see how many points they have. They can see how many points the opponents have. And people in the audience can see it. People in the stands can see it, right? They can see the score. They can often see how much time is left in the quarter, in the game, whatever it may be. They can see the time if time's part of the sport. And those elements are critical to building a business that scales to 7 figures. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. If you think about this quote comes from a client of ours, Chuck Coonrant. And the quote is this: people will pay more for the privilege of working harder than they will work when they are paid. So I'm gonna say it again. People will pay for the privilege of working harder than they will work when they are paid. And what Chuck means by this is this, that people who have a hobby, let's say the hobby is golf or the hobby is tennis, people will work harder for that, right? They will pay for the privilege of working hard on that. So if you're a golfer, they're gonna buy the latest golf clubs. They're gonna hire a coach to help them improve their swing. They're gonna pay for the best tee times, right? They're gonna pay a lot, and they're gonna work very, very hard at that thing, much more so than when they get to the office on a Monday morning. Why is that? Why is it that people struggle to get up at work? I'm gonna pick on hunters right now, but hunters may struggle to get up to go to work Monday through Friday, but deer season opens up and they're up at 3 a.m. cooking a full big breakfast. They're in their stand before the sun comes up, 4:30, 5 o'clock, they're in their stand waiting. It's probably freezing cold too. And you know what? They love it, right? They're enjoying it. They're passionate about it. But Monday rolls around and they can't get out of bed, right? They come rushing into work, haven't eaten breakfast, half awake. Why is that? Because we are wired. We are wired as humans to compete. Even if you're not competitive, you're wired to compete. You're wired to win, and you're wired to keep score. You want to know if you're winning or losing, if you're doing a good job, if you're doing a bad job. We crave that feedback. We also crave it in such a way that we can make adjustments, right? So if you think about any sport, when you see the scoreboard, those players can then make adjustments, right? The coach can make adjustments. He can call different players in. He can substitute players, all based on what is taking place on the scoreboard and how much time's left. You can't manage what you don't measure, and you can't measure what you don't monitor. And scoreboards provide that exact thing for you. They provide the platform, they provide the tool for measurement and for monitoring. Your scoreboard should be dynamic. So first of all, scoreboards in your organization should be created by the players, or in business sense, by the team members. They should create the scoreboard. They should be dynamic, which means this: they have to know the goal of the game before the game starts. I mean, can you imagine a football team going out onto the field? They know how to throw the ball. They know how to pass the ball. They can see where the end zone is, but they don't know that the goal of the game is to actually score points, right? So if they didn't know the goal of the game is to score points, they may, let's just say that a team has a great running back. They may just run the ball the whole time because they think that running is the goal of the game, and whoever runs the fastest wins, or you know what I mean? So as stupid as that example may sound, it happens over and over and over and over again in business. Our team members don't know the goal of the game. And if they don't know the goal of the game, how can we blame them? How can we be frustrated at them when they don't hit the goal, right? It's our job as leaders to help them understand what is the goal of the game and what is the goal for their role in the game that we're about to play. Next, the player should know the score during the game. So can you imagine a game where the players don't know the score during the game and they have to wait to the end of the game to see if they won or if they lost? what kind of game would that be, right? There's not too many games out there where that would be the case. And yet that is what happens in business time and time again, is we have our teammates or our players on the field, so to speak, and they have no clue what the score is. They're busy working day in, day out, but they have no clue. Is what I'm doing today helping us put points on the board, metaphorically speaking, or is it not? Is what I'm doing just in vain and useless? And I'll talk about that in an upcoming framework on how you can make sure that your players know what they're doing in terms of, is what I'm doing today actually helping us reach the goals that we're after, helping us put points on the board. If they know the score during the game, they can change their behavior to win. But if they don't know the score actually during the game, then it's going to be impossible for them to change their behavior and to win the game. And the other thing is, there's certain time frames. So you could have a goal for your organization, and let's say the goal is 7 figures, right? But if you don't have a time frame, in other words, if you don't have a clock counting down to when that's going to be, how does the player know, okay, are we going to try to reach $1 million in revenue this year? Or maybe that's a 10-year goal, right? We have to have a clock. We have to have some time frame stamps set around these scoreboards. Think about the difference between ice skating versus ice hockey. What are the differences between those two? So both, first of all, obviously involve ice skates, they involve ice. What's the difference in those two sports? The difference is this. In ice skating, the participants or the athletes participating in that sport, they actually don't know the score until they're done, right? The score isn't given until they're done. So they don't know how to make adjustments necessarily in the midst of their performance. Now think about ice hockey. With ice hockey, the score is visible where? On a scoreboard. So the players, the coach, can make adjustments in real time based on the score. And the same thing about watching the sports. So if you think about the difference in watching the two sports, with ice hockey, you as a fan know the score immediately, right? When they score a point, you see it on the scoreboard. In ice skating, you don't know the score until what? They're done skating, right? So once they're done skating, you then see the score. Most businesses are run like ice skating, with the only difference is this. In business, we never give the score, ever. So ice skating, at least they get the score when they're done with their performance. This would be an example of, ice skating would be an example of like when you do annual performance reviews. So if you're doing annual performance reviews with your team, that would be an example of ice skating. Now, if you're not doing performance reviews with your team, with your leaders on your team, that's something you need to have an honest conversation with yourself about, right? And you need to get the structure, the framework for a scoreboard in place so that you can have performance reviews. We do performance reviews once a quarter. Ours are actually coming up. This coming Friday will be our quarterly performance reviews. The flip side of this is ice hockey. Again, each individual player can make adjustments in real time based on the score, based on the scoreboard, and what's taking place in the actual match or in the actual game. So the sixth framework, so we got one more framework after this one. The sixth one is what we would call assets versus actions. So an asset is anything that can be leveraged for growth. Anything in your business or organization that can be leveraged for growth. That's an asset. An action is doing a thing. It's an act. Now, when we see these two words on the screen, it's super apparent. It's super obvious. Like, okay, yeah, who doesn't understand this and who doesn't know this? But here's the thing where you and I as leaders, as entrepreneurs, get in trouble. We very often, more than we will admit, we confuse these two things. We so often assume that actions are the things that we should be pursuing instead of building assets. And so let me give you just a couple of quick examples. One example would be, let's say that you have a competitor, whatever your industry is, you have a competitor and your competitor is doing really well, right? So you can kind of tell from the outside that they're selling a lot of their product or service. They seem to be growing very, very fast. They're hiring lots of people. And so what you start doing is you look at them and you say, wonder what they're doing that is resulting in this happening, right? What's taking place? What are they doing that's causing all of this? And so what you see is you see all of these actions, right? So you look at it and you say, okay, well, they're posting on Facebook 3 times a day. They're doing a Facebook Live every single week. They're doing an event, a conference, whatever things they are. You start looking at all of these actions and you start mimicking the actions. I don't know about you. I've been guilty of this. I certainly still have that tendency to look for the actions. What we should be doing as leaders is we should be looking for what are the actual assets behind those actions. So let's just look at the example of, okay, they're posting 3 times a day on Facebook and they're doing a Facebook Live once a week. Those are the actions that we clearly see. But what is the asset that they're building there? They are building and they're leveraging an audience on Facebook. That is what they're building. That is what they're leveraging. And so the question doesn't become, let me copy their actions. The question then becomes, how can I build a similar asset, or how can I build that same asset, but maybe the actions can be or should be different. So maybe for you, maybe you're naturally gifted or skilled. Maybe your team's naturally skilled in doing video. So instead of trying to do 3 posts a day, maybe instead you're doing 2 videos a week for your Facebook audience. Again, when we confuse assets versus actions, we get focused on the activity, right? And activity and accomplishment are 2 different things. They're not the same thing. We all know that. So actions versus assets, we need to make sure that we aren't confusing the 2 and that we're pursuing building assets, whether that's email lists, whether that's web traffic, whether that's Facebook following, whether that's our team members, right? Whether that's the culture that we're building. So assets aren't necessarily money. And as a matter of fact, in this scenario, they're rarely money. The assets that we're talking about are the things that you can leverage in your business for growth. All right. So here's some questions or things to consider. Are we building assets? Are we just taking actions? Are we just checking things off a to-do list, right? Are we actually focused on what is the asset that we're building? And when here's one way that you can tell the difference. If you are just focused on action, so here's what will happen. You see your competitor doing all these posts, 3 posts a day on Facebook and all this other stuff. And what happens is you copy that, right? You think, okay, that's the thing. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to start doing that thing. And you do it for, let's say, a few weeks, and you're like, this doesn't seem to be working. We're not getting traction here. You keep on doing it. And then what happens is you get frustrated. You get frustrated because you've been taking the exact same action that they're taking, but you're not getting the results. And again, if that is true, if you're feeling that frustration because you're copying the action, that's when you need to step back and say, okay, how can we build a similar asset? What do we need to do to build a similar asset instead of just taking those actions? So it should flow this way. Are our actions building the asset, not the other way around? And then which does your scoreboard measure? Are you measuring on your scoreboard actions? In other words, on your scoreboards that you have for your team, is it just a long checklist of activities or actions for them to take? Or are you intentional about ensuring that the actions that they're taking are actually building an asset, right? Are they all focused on building those assets? And then the last question to consider is, how are you measuring the performance of your team? How are you measuring that? Are you measuring it based on their actions? Or are you measuring it based on the assets that they're each building for your team, for your company, for your organization? Framework number 7. This is the last one, our last framework we're going to cover. And the framework is simply this: the power of consistency. This is the most anti-entrepreneurial framework that there is. And what I mean by that is this. Entrepreneurs typically, and this is not an absolute, but typically entrepreneurs hate the monotony of doing the same thing over and over again, right? Typically speaking, they love adventure. They love trying new things. They love experimenting. They love having their hands in a lot of different areas. They don't like to be solely focused on one thing, and particularly doing that one thing over and over again. But as a leader, as an entrepreneur, we have to go back all the way to framework 1, and we have to say, you know what? I've got to look in the mirror, and I have to be willing to change myself. I have to be willing to work on myself as a leader. And if that means being consistent, which I'm telling you it does, then you have to work on that in yourself. And, we often say that consistency creates miracles. Consistency creates miracles. We say that often, and we say it over and over again in all different contexts because it's so important. Consistency does create miracles. And if you're thinking about this or looking at this as a leader, and you're like me, you hate doing the same things over and over. You would love to experiment. You would love to do new things. What I'm telling you is this: personality isn't permanent. By the way, that's the name of a book. I highly recommend the book. But personality isn't permanent. You can work on your personality. You go look in the mirror, framework 1, and you work on yourself, because consistency does create miracles. And let me give you some specific ways or some specific things for you as a leader, as an entrepreneur, that you need to be consistent with. Number 1, you've got to be consistent with looking in the mirror, framework 1. You've got to be consistent in that. When things aren't going well, you need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, how have I failed the business? How have I failed my team? Now, the flip side of that's true as well. When things are going well, look in the mirror and say, what actions were taken that led us to this success? What actions were taken? What did I do to help contribute to this? And most often what you will discover when there's a success in your organization and you've been consistent, that success is a result of the consistency. It is a result of the consistency. The other things you need to be consistent in. So 1, you need to be consistent in looking in the mirror and being honest with yourself. 2, you've got to be consistent in your communication. You've got to be clear. Is this implicit? Is it explicit? When you're frustrated with the performance of someone, look in the mirror first and ask yourself, where did I not communicate clearly and correctly and deliberately? I don't know if that's the right word, but there's another word I'm looking for. I just can't think of it. Where did I not communicate to them? Where did they not understand what it was that was expected or what I was hoping would happen in this situation? The other thing you need to be consistent in is in the conversation around trust versus suspicion. You need to be consistent in your ability to build trust with your team. And that means holding yourself to a higher standard, holding yourself more accountable than you hold your team. And when you start thinking through all the good intentions that you had for doing the thing, but you didn't do it. So you set the goal to do the thing, but you didn't do it. When you start checking off this list in my head, but yeah, I had this come up, I had this come up, all these excuses, right, come up. You need to understand that it's not just a matter of you're the boss, you can do what you want, but you are intentionally building suspicion by not keeping your word. And again, that's whether your word's implied, that's whether your word was explicitly given or implied. Either way, you've given your word and you must live up to your word. It's critical for the success of your organization. And the last couple of things, would be to be consistent in the performance reviews you do with your team, in the feedback you give your team. Make sure that you're constantly having dialogue back and forth with them around these frameworks. These frameworks have to be ingrained into your organization for it to be effective and for you to be able to scale your organization to 7 figures. Any particular questions? I'm going to glance down at the phone here and see if there's any questions. going on, Jessica? I don't know if you're still on here. Let's see. Angela. Yeah. It is sort of like a confessional, Angela. That is true. I don't see any other questions on here. If you do have questions, you're more than welcome to leave them in the comments. We'll come back and check this video and answer any questions that may be posted. If you have questions, you want to talk to us, you want to reach out to us, this is our website, uglymugmarketing.com. You can email me. There's my email address. That's our phone number. You know, when it comes to business, our passion is, sure, we love marketing, and yes, we love websites, and we love social media, and we love all of those things. But our passion is this: we want to help our clients, our entrepreneurs, have a better night's sleep. I don't know how else to say it, but that we want it to be so that when entrepreneurs work with us, they're able to sleep better at night. They're able to go home with less stress. They're not worried about, you know, finding new customers, attracting new customers. We want to give you the tools. We want to give you the resources. And that's why I want to share this framework with you today. I want to kind of give you some of what we've done and what we're doing internally to help you put the structure, put the processes in place so that you can build a structure and a framework or several frameworks for your business, for your organization, to help you reach the goals that you're after, whatever those goals may be, whether it's a monetary goal, whether it's an impact goal, whether it's, you know, whatever that is, that these frameworks will help you in that direction. If you have certain frameworks that you have in place for your organization, I would love to hear them. Feel free to email me or leave a comment below. I love frameworks. I love kind of putting these guardrails in place that help us make sure that we're staying on the right track, we're staying on the right path, and we're heading in the right direction. So thanks again so much for taking the time out of your day. Those of you who've joined us live, thank you so much for taking the time. Leave a comment if you have a question. Feel free to go back and rewatch, and we will see you soon. Thanks so much.